Good good morning and welcome to another edition of Pharside Pholios, where we are being festive in the fall with a series of great author interviews. And today, our special guest is author Kimberly T. Hennessy. She is self proclaimed the slow writer. She's a wide eyed cherry with a side of cook, but don't let that fool you. She gravitates toward dystopian stories for their doom and gloom just in time for the season. And let's
That's
just
right.
say she's a mature woman with an odd sensibility for death and mayhem. So when she's not writing, she's plotting a family trip with her pot-belly black cat. So welcome to the far side, Kimberly T. Hennessy.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
All right, so we are going to be talking today about your book, She Runs with Wolves. Um, what is it about? What brought you to that title? What brought you to this story?
Well, as you've mentioned, I am a slow writer, so this was a puzzle piece and glue. It didn't come to me as like in a state of hallelujah, and it didn't come to me. It came to me in pieces, and it was like a work in progress. It was type, erase, go back to the drawing board, and it took me 3 years to write this novel. And so, yeah, so I'm definitely a slow writer. I'm not one of those that can pop out a book every 3 months. Definitely not. And so, what brought me to, the title, first of all, is I had read the book, The Women That Run with Wolves. And it's a very popular book. And it spoke about the tribe of women. And I was like, that's exactly what I'm trying to get to. That it spoke to me. And I was like, and my book had to do with wolves. And I was like, yeah, she is running with wolves. She's trying to build herself up, and she's trying to become she is this person, and she feels like she can be more, and she's held back by all these insecurities, by all these things that are happening around her. And so by running with wolves, she becomes, or she will become, who she's meant to be. So that's how the title was born, She Runs with Wolves. So it was very much inspired by that book. And the story itself, again, that was, it initially started with so basically, I've always loved YA. I've always loved books that dealt with like coming of age stories, where
Mhm.
the young woman discovers who she is through a series of trials and tribulations, like in Pride and Prejudice with Mr. Darcy and all those things. And by the end of the book, she's fully blossomed and knows who she is. But the problem I always had with those books as I was getting older is that they're often 15, 16-year-old girls who, by the time they end the book, who are maybe a year older, discover who they are. And I'm like, I was sitting, I was thinking about this when I was like, I want to write a book. And I was like a fresh new mom, and I had not a toddler, but a newborn baby. And I was 32, and I was like, I still don't know what I'm doing. I still haven't figured it out. I think I've blossomed, but not sure where the heck I'm going. I didn't have nothing figured out. And so when I read these books, as much as I enjoyed, reading them, I always felt a little bit like they didn't talk to me anymore, because I was getting older, and I still hadn't figured it out, while this young teenager was like, yeah, I got it all down. And I was just like, I need to write a book where the hero is my age, or at the time my age. So that's where like it kind of started from, and that was a long time ago. Like I said, my daughter had just been born, and a whole bunch of stuff happened in between, and I stopped writing the book. And anyway, so when I went back to it, that was still, very much an idea that I wanted to explore, where it's an older woman. So the hero in this book is, in her 30s or somewhat. We're not too sure. I don't really go out and say it, but we know that she's, older than in her teen years. So she's around 28, 30. And I wanted to explore basically the women's sensibilities, like what she's going through, and so the book itself. So the young woman realizes she's pregnant, and she's held captive by a really bad person, a totalitarian type government. It's not a government, it's a regime, and the head of that is like the king, and he's very abusive, and he wants something from her, and she's never known what, and she's been captive for a very long time, and now she's pregnant, and she's like, I'm not going to put my baby through this. So she just goes, and she's like, I'm going to have to escape. And when she does decide to do that and escape, at the same time, something happens, and I'm not going to go too much into detail because I don't want to ruin the surprise or anything, but her brain starts to unravel. She completely loses, and she's like going mad, and she doesn't understand why. And at the same time, her sole preoccupation is to make sure this baby is safe. And she does manage to escape, and she falls into this underground cult. And she thinks that they're there to help her. And so she has to go through these different kinds of how can I put this? So she thinks that they're there to help. And so it puts her trust in them, but she doesn't really have a choice because she's unraveling and there's no other solution, and she's scared of losing the baby. But she realizes that by doing what they're asking her to do, she's going to have to give up part of herself, part of her soul.
Wow.
And so she takes that, like her essence of who she is. And again, I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to, ruin the ending or anything like that. But yeah, so she has to give up who she is. And so basically at that point, that's it. She has to find herself and discover who she is to get back to where she needs to be going. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense, because right at the beginning of book one, The Sacred Cup, there's this quote that kind of stuck out in my head about this, it's kind of setting it up. It says, after a millennium, however, nothing but relics and a single prophecy had survived a forgotten age. So what about, how things forgotten play into, our coming of age?
Right. So basically, when I started writing this book for real, like when I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to start something and finish it, it was really important to me to create something that spanned generations. I really, really love like lore and myth and legends. And I always believed that within those things, there's always like a grain of truth. And the whole book is built to look and feel like prophecy, like a Bible. It's literally every chapter is like the revelation of, it's almost like a Bible. And it's a Bible like the future, kind of a future Bible. And it explains, and my desire through all of that was to have, or to show in my humble way, my very modest way, that science and religion, because science is very much a part of this, is always, so when we can't explain something, we kind of give it this religious connotation. We kind of give it this mythological, this right. We give it this big, like, for example, in the book, there's a passage where Dewar is another character, and he finds like these rocks that change color. And I had read somewhere, and this is actually taken from, the stone, well, the not the Stone Age, but the later, the I have the word in French. So, anyways, it's taken from Stonehenge and back in those days. So, and the people there, they would venerate this rock because it changed color and they couldn't explain it. They didn't have the science behind it. And so I'm trying with this book, I'm trying to create this blend of science and religion and explore how we interpret all of that. So for me, creating like prophecy, so the book itself, we start into this desolate, destroyed land, and winter has covered all of the land, all of the known land. And so they live in a winter desert. And basically, all that's left, as you mentioned, are relics of the past. But these relics are extremely advanced in technologically speaking. So we're not looking at old things from the past that we can kind of, us as today as humans, look at those and it kind of extrapolate like, oh, that was probably a building made out of stone, or these arrowheads were made out of stone also. We are sophisticated enough to understand how the past worked. And it was really, I loved the idea of exploring, of a society, a future society, exploring old artifacts that are actually more advanced technologically speaking than they are. So they're finding TVs, they can't explain it. They're finding telephones, they can't explain it. They're finding all these relics that are super advanced in technology, but they can't explain it. And my question was, as a sci-fi writer, was what would they do? How would they react to seeing a television and not understanding what the heck it is, because they've lost that part of history, right? To war and all those things. So basically I was like, well, it would become prophecy. It would be like, oh, well, the society of, the past, they are sending us a message. And so this prophecy kind of evolves over a span of generations to become this thing that will fulfill itself. And so there's a twist at the end that partially explains, and it's just a whole lot of fun, basically. I hope that makes sense without selling too much of the story. But yeah, so basically my love of Mad Max, for example, if you've watched Mad Max, the movies, where, it's the same kind of premise. Instead of a desert, well, we're in the winter. So because I come from Canada and snow is a very big part of our life. So write what you know, right? So
Right,
yeah,
what you know, right? You're writing from
right.
experience.
That's
From
right.
experience. So another thing about that ties to the past is one of the quotes from the story that was stuck in the main character's mind. She's making these connections between what she's presently feeling and experiencing, and then this quote that she remembers in her head from the past, that the dead inherit the living. And it's
Right.
something that she finds herself repeating in her head, like almost like a mantra, trying to
Figure it out.
make that connection.
Yeah.
Is that something that is explored not through your work, just like your other work, Digital Coup, The Silent Rising, this kind of um, remembrance, bridge from past to present, and making those connections and thinking of memory?
Memory. Well, so memory is definitely a big thing in most of my stories. The Dead Inherit the Living is actually a soft prequel to She Runs with Wolves. It was my attempt to write short stories for that collection of short stories,
Mhm.
of setting up what the world was like before the war happened and destroyed the world. So it's basically setting us up for She Runs with Wolves. And we kind of you don't have to read the prequel to read She Runs with Wolves, but if you do read, and it's okay to read the prequel after you've read She Runs with Wolves. It's basically for those curious to figure out how was the world before it became what Ira knows about it. Like how the main character, basically, her name is Ira, and so she lives in a world that's destroyed. There's not much left, and the prequels kind of address. It doesn't address that, but it explains how we got to that a little bit. So it's set in the future. It's set. Well, yeah. So past, future, and basically we're in the city and we're exploring three different women living three different types of lives. And we see one who's a workaholic and she needs to take these stimulants to be able to keep up with the world. There's another one who, has to leave for Mars because her mom has been promoted for work. So she needs to leave the world behind. And we really explore the layers of how the world has evolved, and we dig deep into the history. And then the third one, which is like the one that really addresses the She Runs with Wolves, is a hacker, and she hacks into this really high government security system, and something happens to her. And so I won't say more because, or else I'm selling again the story. But and basically, it was important for me to explore those stories. It doesn't speak to the dead inherit the living. It was really basically, I explored those stories to kind of give the reader a chance of understanding where I was coming from as an author and what happened to Ira's world. Because there's this whole backstory that I don't necessarily explain, but I know in the book, right? So that's it. So it was basically kind of a little bit of a backstory to She Runs with Wolves. And The Dead Inherit the Living was really, again, my attempt to create this bridge, as you said, this to bridge the gap between the past that they can't explain and the present that they're living. And it's really my attempt to, because at the end, I'm going to explain what the dead inherit the living mean. So at the end, once you get to the conclusion, you kind of understand, oh, that's what it means. So it's kind of setting up the stage for the ending. Yeah. You kind of, because I love books where when you're reading, I love books when you're like, I don't get this. And then everything ties in together and you're like, oh my God, it's like this one big puzzle that just comes into focus. And you're like, I'm looking at what am I looking at? So I love those kinds of stories that just open up and you're like, wow. So I tried again in my very humble attempt to create something like that.
Well, we appreciate your attempt, especially for, bringing, a fresh voice to the dystopian genre. And
Thank you.
so, what about the dystopian? Because it's not mystery. It is not romance. It is
No.
not. It's not. It's not comedy. It's not. The typical, cookbook type of story.
That's right.
So
No, it's not. Yeah.
What do you feel distinguishes your dystopian work from any of the other genres?
So for example, for me, like one of the best dystopian stories that I had read was like 1984, which is very focused on a totalitarian government that controls an entire society, and to make that society comply to the point that they don't even know that they're complying anymore. That's how much of a control they have. And that to me is very dystopian. That to me really goes and digs deep into what dystopian is. And I kind of added my own flavor. So it's not, so I am exploring. So basically that's what for me dystopia means, is that you're exploring either political, social, cultural, economical questions, and you're looking at a facet of society and how it works and how the people manage that society, basically. And so I'm exploring that. I mean, we are in a destroyed society. We do have a very ruthless leader, but I also enjoy very much sci-fi and fantasy. And I guess maybe to the detriment of certain readers, I didn't narrow down, like, they often say, they as in the people of the publishing world, you got to have a specific niche, and you got to narrow down and drill down into that niche. And this is my first novel. I haven't written thousands of novels. This is my first. I do have experience in writing. I'm a screenwriter, and I've written screenplays, although writing a novel is a totally different beast. But anyway, this is my first novel. And so I didn't drill or dig deep into one niche. I did explore different facets of what I wanted to read. So this is basically a very personal project for myself. I didn't go, and a lot of people write to, what's the term that they use? They write to like the popular genre, I guess. There's a word for it. Anyways, I forget it. But I didn't do that. This is a very personal project. So there's a lot of sci-fi / fantasy connotations in my book. And although I tried to limit it to sci-fi, I know that a lot of the elements feel fantastical, which in book 2 will be explained in a scientific way. But at the moment, they look very fantasy. So I'm obliged to say, yes, if you're reading it, you will see fantasy connotations in it. Although most of it, I tried to keep it into the sci-fi realm. So I tried to explore this sci-fi. I tried to explore this dystopia, and I'm not the first one to do it, this dystopian world through a sci-fi / again, as I mentioned before, religious lens. Not that I'm particularly religious. It's just that I find it extremely fascinating to study the human behavior behind that, those beliefs, and how do they come from, and where do they come from, and why, and why, and people reading it will definitely see those questions being not answered, but those questions being explored, basically. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that
Yeah,
truly
okay.
answers my question. And see, you brought to the point that this was your first novel. So what was the experience going from screenwriting to writing this novel? What was that journey like? Because
It was
now you just,
go ahead, sorry.
yeah, so you've got film and screen, and now you've got a novel printed, your words in print for the masses versus kind of your words in like view or
Yeah.
acted out. Yeah.
So when I initially started, I tried writing novels, and then, as I said, I had kids, and it became extremely difficult to find any time to sit down and write blocks of text. And so at that time, I was like, what other way could I express myself that doesn't require me to sit down and edit for long periods of time? And screenwriting came up. And so I just dove head first into screenwriting, and I went and got myself, teachers, and learning all about the craft of screenwriting. So when my kids started growing up, and I didn't have, and I had more time on my hands, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to trying my hand at writing a novel. And I thought I would be pretty good. But it turns out that there's a very steep learning curve between screenwriting and writing a novel. And I found that writing a novel, so by writing screenplays, the plot moves everything forward. So your plot is the main thing, and without this plot, your movie won't move forward. You have to have something happen to the plot for the next scene, the next scene, the next scene. So that means it's a really tight, very concise, very structured product that moves in a straight line, so to speak. Whereas with a novel, you're just free to do what the hell you ever want. And it's like you're going left, you're going right, up, down. It just, yeah. So I was like kind of lost in all of that. And by the time that I finished my first draft, in my mind, I was like, I have a novel. I'm done. And that was a year after I had started. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. I got a book. And then I sent it to an editor, and they're like, well, this is a really good first draft. And I was like, what? This is a first draft? What are you saying? I poured my heart and soul in this. And I realized that no, it was definitely I wouldn't even call it a first draft. I would have called it a very detailed outline, extremely detailed outline. Because first draft implies that you got a really good first base and you're just going to be tweaking a few things. And here I was changing, like there are chunks that were just taken out, changed the name, change it. Like it was a really good first outline to give me a good sense of direction. So, and that's the thing, is that when you're writing a novel, what's happened in my case is that, so you have the possibility to explore many different characters. You have the possibility of exploring themes and going in different directions. But because I was coming from a screenwriting perspective, my writing is very tight and very concise. So it's very action packed. It moves along at a very fast pace. And that's just because that's my background. Like, I'm sure if I keep writing, and exploring my craft and learning more and more about it, I will definitely be able to flesh out even more these different themes and but it's because in my mind, I don't know, when I was writing, I was like, oh, people don't want to know about this. So I would streamline it, so it's very, it's a very plot driven book, kind of because of my background. So I fully expect on my second, third, and hopefully a long career as an author, I will be able to expand more on that. But those are the main differences between screenwriting and being in writing a novel. And also, I mean, when you write like a film or something like that, you have a whole bunch of people there to kind of counsel you and tell you, okay, let's change it. Like, you have the director that you're working with, and you're working with different people, and they have their own vision. So you're working with it's a collaboration. Whereas with a novel, I was, on my own, and I was second guessing a lot of my decisions, and it's very scary to put out a novel. And I'll say it again, you're very vulnerable. You put something out there, and it's scary. Like I've gotten really great feedback, but I've also gotten, not so good feedback. Nothing harsh. I've never gotten anything where they put me down as a person or anything like that. But, that they just didn't appreciate the book. And I was like, and it hurts. It hurts really a lot. So I'm learning to navigate that as well.
So what's a word for that you would give aspiring writers that, people, since this is your first novel and you've gone through the process, and you've written short stories, this collection of short stories, and so I'm believing there's going to be a book 2, since this is like the first of the Pogrom War series.
Yeah, exactly. So no, there's definitely a book 2 in the works. And my, I guess, advice would be to any new author that comes up is that your once you finish writing, that's not your book. So as I mentioned before, it's probably going to be your first draft. It's going to be definitely a rough draft, and you're going to be edited. So a lot of authors that start out, anyways, I was one of those. I really, really believed in my heart that once I had finished writing, I would get it edited and I would have my book. But that's just not how it works. If you're a fast writer, good for you. By the time you finish it, then you'll have someone, an editor, and I highly recommend you have a professional edit your book. But don't go for that line edit right away, because you still need to develop on that story. And so bottom line is that that first book, you're going to be editing for a few months. After that, you're going to be editing to the point where you just don't want to read the book anymore, to the point where you know the pages and the words by heart, and you're just like, okay, and you see it's to the point where you can't even see it anymore. And that's why you need an outside editor to look over your material, because you're looking at it so much that you just don't know anymore. And yeah, and that first book isn't your first book. You're going to be working on it. There are some few exceptions that they write once and they edit as they go. Good for them. I'm definitely not one of them, and I don't think that's the majority of writers either. Oops.
Well,
Sorry.
thank you for just your candor and your for answering these questions and your thoughtfulness. How can our our viewers and those who watch, between those who are watching us live and those who may catch the replay, get your book and see what you're doing and find out what's happening next?
Well, first of all, thank you so much again for having me. These questions were really great. I really enjoyed our time together. So thank you for putting me at ease. I know that I get nervous. As I've mentioned before, I kind of get nervous in these interviews. I tend to babble, but you've really made this very easy. So thank you so much for having me. And yes, so if people are interested in communicating with me, I'm definitely one of those authors that loves talking with people. Whether you've read or not my book, is fine. I mean, I just enjoy talking with people that like the same things I do. My social media presence is mostly on Facebook, on my author page, which you can find on my website at kimberlythennessy.com. So on my website, you'll see I have Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. Those are the three that I'm mostly on. But if you really, really want to connect with me, I know most of my peers and the people that enjoy my work connect with me on my newsletter. So every month I put out a newsletter and I talk about the latest shows that I've been watching, the latest series on Netflix, the recent book. And I've had a lot of people, write back, oh, I love that movie too. And oh my God, it was so good. And we just, talk that way. So I really connect with people on my newsletter. Otherwise, like I said, yeah, on Facebook is really a great place for me to catch up with people.
Well, I'd like to thank my guest, Kimberly T. Hennessy, for spending this time with us this morning. We wish you continued success with She Runs with Wolves. For those who are watching Pharside Pholios live or catch us with the replay, make sure you're staying tuned to the Pharside Co-ed Book Club Facebook page for more author interviews and posts as we are festive in the fall, rounding out the month of November with some great things coming in, rounding out the month of October, going into November, great things coming up in November. So until next time, remember this: many roots, many voices are a part of the infinite story. So plant your seed. Have a great day.
Bye.